So welcome to Hey Neighbor. If this isn't the class that you're interested in, now's your time to get up and leave with just hurting my feelings, no one else's, but now is the time for you all to leave. I had asked Scott if there was a resource that I could potentially use just as a guide, because it's just busy serving on grand jury and working and doing all the things. And so he had sent me a resource, and so I want to share the resources that I used for this class. So Capitol Hill Baptist Church out of Washington, D.C., they have their core seminars online. You all can pop on there. I think it's listed under core seminars as the header for it. And they have a class called Neighboring. And that was kind of like the thing that kind of started this whole process of oh, there might be something to this. Now, obviously, Washington, D.C. is very different than where we live, so a lot of the references that they made and stuff, and there's two men teaching the class, it's just very, very different, but it was certainly a resource for this class. And there's two books. One is The Art of Neighboring. This one is an excellent book. It's a super easy read. Even if you just were on your lunch break and you read a chapter or something, it's really, really easy. So that's one book. There's also Revive Our Hearts Ministry, and which was really interesting, is they just got done with 15 classes of You're Welcome Here. And I don't know if you all listen to Revive Our Heart or Nancy DeMoss Wogelmuth, but this series, it's in her podcast, and each one is maybe 20 minutes long. It's not long at all. It's a super easy listen, but it's fantastic. So you all should listen to that if you're looking for a podcast. Reaching Lost Sheep. If you all didn't take that class by Dr. Ormsby, I am someone that's a slower learner, and sometimes it can be like drinking from a fire hose from him, for me, maybe not for you all. And so I felt very intimidated going into his class. Honestly, it was the best class I've sat in. It was so accessible and simplified. It was fantastic. So if you all have ever been in his class and felt a little overwhelmed at the content, like me, this one is fantastic, and it really sheds light on some of the challenges that we face with reaching our neighbors. So I certainly recommend that you all listen to his class. It's on the YouTube channel, so definitely do that. I taught a class in 2018. How was it that long ago? I feel like the pandemic screwed up my timetable. I lost 3 years of my life. I can't remember anything. But that's on the Buck Run website. There's another book that I used that I'm going to use in a future class in this series, and it's Bless, 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbor and Change the World. And if you're just looking for a book where you're just I'm not super sure where to start, or I want to have some family conversations, this one's a really good resource for that, to just figure out how do I need to get started on this, or I feel a little stuck. So that one's going to be referenced later, but I just wanted to show you all that. So the other thing is, this series was, how I came up with Hey Neighbor was my sister. She had a best friend, and she would always go over there. They lived really close to us, but far enough that you needed to drive. And they had someone that was a neighbor, and they called her Hey Neighbor. And so I would always ask him, because we were really close in age, but when you're a year apart from your sister, who wants their little sister around? You're still the little sister. So Kim and Lisa always did stuff together, and they would always talk about Hey Neighbor. And I was like, don't you even know her name? And they were like, no, she's just Hey Neighbor. And I was like, she's right next door. You don't know her name. And they're like, no, she's Hey Neighbor. She still lives in the exact same house. And when I'm driving to my parents' house, I will wave on Newtown Pike at Hey Neighbor, because I'll see her out in her yard, and I'm like, Hey Neighbor. And so that was kind of where I was thinking, this class was gosh, she's right there. And haven't we all done that, where you have somebody for years next to you all, and you miss those opportunities and you miss getting their name, and you just kind of are like, oh, that's my neighbor, that's my hey neighbor. You just kind of nod, but you really haven't done anything to actually engage them or learn their name. So that's kind of where we're starting with that. So we're gonna have 2 primary goals, and that's just the description of the class, all of y'all saw that. So we have 2 primary goals, and the first goal is over the next 6 weeks, I want to give you an idea of what it looks like for a Christian to take advantage of opportunities to love our neighbors better. Some of you all are probably doing this really, really well, while some of you all haven't even gotten started, and it is really challenging to figure out, where do I start? Especially like even if you've lived somewhere a long time, it feels even more awkward. We're going to cover some basics about being a faithful neighbor, but we're mainly going to look at how Scripture points us to neighboring well and talk about opportunities and suggestions for better neighboring that will likely apply to a lot of us in different ways, just because we have different economics, financial situations in here. We live in different neighborhoods. We're just all going to approach things differently with different experiences we've also had going into this. So the class is going to fall into the might, not the must. So just because, something gets said, you'd be like, well, that doesn't apply to me. Okay, it doesn't apply to you. That's fine if it doesn't apply to you. There's also seasons of busyness and things that we just can't always predict. So those seasons, it's understandable that maybe that's not going to be a time where you're really involved with your neighbor, but those seasons don't last forever, but they're also not an excuse. So we need to be real careful of how we're giving ourselves an excuse. And it doesn't mean if you don't know your neighbor's names, you're in sin. That's not what that means. But if you are actively choosing to ignore them, well, you need to look at your heart. So, but we just really need to think about how we're going to go beyond hey neighbor. And sometimes that's going to mean that it stops right there because our neighbor just shuts us down. But the other times, I hope that what we're going to do is maybe spend the next 6 weeks really thinking about how we can encourage our neighbor, maybe have a deeper relationship, and just get more connected with them. So our second goal is I'm going to give you an understanding for some challenges, real and perceived, with loving your neighbor. So certain parts aren't as easy as they used to be. Christians are just as guilty of wanting to build fences and, have privacy in their yards as what we'll say lost people are. So we really need to think about what some of those real and perceived concerns are and not give ourselves a pass. We have to strategize and do things on purpose. There's a phrase in business, it's called "you can't manage what you aren't measuring," and that applies here. So you have to think, do I have a specific amount that's in my budget for neighboring? We should all have a budget. We should be stewarding our money well. Do we have an allotted amount of money that we're choosing to neighbor with? And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, so it kind of doesn't matter where you fall. It can be a tiny thing. It can be like a watermelon seedling. It could be, like a $5 Entenmann's. Kroger always has them buy one, get one free. Get one for you, get one for them. It could be a tiny little thing that you're like, oh, I'm going to take that over there to them. Just like I'm so happy it's spring. Or summer's coming. Let's eat donuts together or whatever. You can easily work that into your budget no matter what you have. Do you have a specific family time where you include your children or your grandchildren or your friends, your friend group, where you sit down and say, I want to strategize about how I'm going to do this? And it's important to sit down with your family, especially if you have children, to say, how are we going to do this? You're modeling that for them, of walking next door and saying, this person's important to me. Not just our family, just not the people that we go to church with, not the people that look exactly like us or say all the things exactly like us, but the person that lives next door is important to us. And if you aren't really doing neighboring intentionally, it's really going to be a lot harder for your children to pick it up because they're just not going to see it. And then you're going to expect them when they're 18 all of a sudden to go out and be like, oh, my neighbors matter. They're going to model most likely what you did, or someone else is going to have to teach them, and they're going to have that learning curve to start doing it. So who's been at Buck Run lately and thought, I don't know half these people? That's me. And I'm like on the welcome team. Like, I can't tell you how many times someone has come in and I'll look at Lisa or Jeff and I'm like, what is their name? And, we'll be like, I don't know. I think I've seen them. I mean, it's kind of crazy how many faces there are that we just don't know every person that goes here. And again, that's another thing the pandemic kind of changed. It's glorious that there's so many people that we don't know. But the problem is like we're not really stepping out to get to know people that aren't in our community group or that aren't in our life season or whatever. And we need to make sure that we're doing that. So here's what I want you all to do. I want you all to turn to the people next to you. That can be one person, that can be two people next to you, however it works out. And I want you all to ask each other these questions just so you can get to know the person that's next to you. And I also want to caution you that if you feel uncomfortable right now, that's probably indicating something that's going on in your heart. And this is a controlled, safe environment. If you're not, you have that little funny feeling in your stomach in here, you probably aren't going to be really willing to do it at home either. So you need to kind of go, this is definitely something I need to pray about because I've got that feeling. So you all just take a few minutes and ask each other these questions. So did anybody learn anything new? Okay. Did anybody learn a name that they didn't know? Okay, great. So the point of that is it kind of doesn't matter how long you've been somewhere. You can probably always learn something new or introduce yourself. And it didn't feel wildly uncomfortable once you got started, did it? It was the moment of turning, you're like, I feel sweaty. But then you're all of a sudden you just go, okay, you just get in the rhythm of that. And that's exactly what it's going to be, reaching out to your neighbor. Even if you've lived, my parents have lived in their house 51 years, and Daniel and I have lived in our house for 6 years. And the only way that people have left around my parents is, frankly, they've passed away. All of them have lived there for their entire lives. There's just no one that comes new. That's the only way you get into where they live. But for us, there's a pretty high turnover in our neighborhood because it's a lot of younger families. And so they're just kind of cycling through. But again, that was pretty easy. And if you all probably have new people that come in your neighborhood, or you're new to your neighborhood. It is a great conversation starter to just go over to your neighbor and simply say, this world's crazy. I just want to exchange mobile numbers with you. I just want to, just if something happens, I'm not here, you can reach out to me, and I'd love to have yours. And if something happens, I can reach out to you. Or if I get a package that's yours and you're not home and, I don't want to leave it on your doorstep, I have your number, I can text you or whatever. That's a pretty normal thing to just want to exchange that phone number, because it's not like people get out a phone book and then they're like, let's flip through the yellow pages. For those of you that are young, it's a book that had everyone's phone number except for unlisted. And so, it's just a great conversation starter. You can even print a little card up for them and take it over to them and just hand it to them and say, here's our name, here's our mobile number. And the next time they see you, it's kind of like that barrier's down, because now you all have each other's name and number. I have a neighbor that we did that the day that we moved in, and she still has it on her fridge. And I think that is so sweet because, that's fridge status. People's grandkids go on their fridge. I just think it's so sweet that she keeps that. So we can also have unconscious biases and presumptions. And those are like really tricky to kind of go, oh, am I feeling something I shouldn't be feeling? We may not also understand cultural differences. What we would consider to be loud might be their normal. Have you ever been around a family that you're like, oh my gosh, they're so loud? And, because it's just not your normal. Or you might look at their fence and go, that is really shabby and broken down, and I wish that they would fix that. But you don't know that they have like a health problem, and you didn't even realize they had a health problem, but that's why their fence is that way. You also could think, oh, this person's just a total hermit because I never see them. Maybe their work schedule's just the opposite end of yours. And now you know when you're mowing, it's their sleep time. And so you could even kind of adjust certain things. So again, you have to like get into people's lives to start to hear these things. A lot of you all, thank you, in this room help my friends from Zimbabwe. And I am so grateful. Thank you so much. You didn't even know those people and you just stepped in. One of the interesting things, now I'm not saying this as the entire country because they don't represent all of Zimbabwe, but in the area that they live in, part of the culture is even the poorest people have maids, and they do your cooking, they do your cleaning, and they take care of your children. So even the poorest people have someone that is somehow poor, and then will take care of everything in their house, their children. It doesn't mean that they aren't also in their home. They're not cooking, they're not cleaning, they're not doing anything. So, other than like potentially their job or whatever it is that they would do during the day. So when you think about them coming to America, not only were they learning like America bureaucracy, they were also learning life skills. Like, how long does it take to turn the washing machine on? How much time do I have between that to put the next load in? Or how hard it is to put a fitted sheet on or fold one? Or, thinking about this is how long it takes to cook a meal. I didn't realize it would take an hour to cook a meal while I was doing this. I thought I had more time. So not only are they learning all of these American customs, they're also trying to learn life skills that up until this point, they're in their 30s. They've never had to learn these. And so they have 3 children. One of their children is in elementary school, and so she is starting that, and they're trying to figure out the ebbs and flows of that. They work 4 jobs, and, it's like, that's a lot on them. Do you think that if you encountered them just randomly on the street, that you would know that they're going through all of those things? Probably not. You just would maybe even think, well, why did they do this or why did they do that? And you concentrate on your frustration with something that they did or them being late showing up to something, when even being on time is flexible in their country, which is a very hard thing for me because I like being early. And so, just having someone show up late is a harder thing for me to process, but knowing that for them, that's just like, hey, we show up. Like if you say 9, that means up to 9:30. That's fine. So that's something else to consider that you may not even realize. So again, we make up like all these scenarios of why people do things, and they're like really crummy scenarios, but like we don't ever come up with like really good scenarios. Like, I bet this person runs a soup kitchen and hugs puppies and is really tired because they clean for the elderly. Like, we're not sitting around making up like good scenarios for people. We're just always like, why did they do this? Why did they do this to me? So that's something that we really need to think about, is what is that unconscious bias or presumption that we might be making about somebody. So our next little thing that we're gonna do, this is going to be pretty familiar to some people. It was part of the biblical hospitality class that I did in 2018. I am really curious if anything changed on anyone's that filled it out before, or if they had moved. Some of you all have moved since then. And I don't know if maybe you decided fresh start, you did something differently. But what you're going to do is you're going to fill it out for your neighborhood. So for where you live, you do not get a pass if you live in the country. You do not get a pass if you live in between, because that's what everyone does. They immediately come up with, well, I don't have a neighbor, I live on a farm. No, you have a neighbor. It might be further away, but you definitely have a neighbor. So fill that out from where you are. And in the country, obviously that's going to look a little different, to do a grid like that. But think about who lives around you. If you live in an apartment, you can still think about the apartments that live around you. Just kind of do a little abstract thought. Then what I also want you to do is put your names on there for the people that you work with. Now, if you work from home, that could be maybe the people that you homeschool with. That could be the people you volunteer with. That might be somebody that you serve with. So use some of those abstract thinking skills when you're thinking about like home, your neighborhood. That's pretty cut and dry for who's on your chart. And then who's actually like your, in quotes, co-workers as well. So take the time to fill that out. Like go ahead and take like a minute or two just to get your names down on there. Now while you all are filling those out, you might even find that the work ones or coworker ones are a little bit easier and they come a little bit faster because you're just like, oh, Wendy sits next to me and, Jill's on the other side and Leanne's, in the office like across or whatever. Like you might find that those work ones come easier. Or, like I said, if you're a homeschool mom, those other moms, whatever it might be for your life season that you're in. But then you go, I'm awake and around these people for 8-9 hours a day. You think that that person isn't a neighbor that you're supposed to also step into their life and speak to them and encourage them and share the gospel with them? Of course you're supposed to do that. So what we really want to do is we want to move people from strangers to acquaintances, from our hey neighbor to our hello Allison. Like we want to move those people from just like our hey neighbor to really knowing their name, and then from an acquaintance to a relationship. And really visualize what this looks like for you in your individual situation, neighborhoods, farms, whatever that is. You're going to see people on the street. You're going to see people in your neighborhood. You're going to invite them into your yard as you're talking. That's just going to happen. Maybe, oh, let me go get that thing for you or something like that. Someone may be in your yard. You may be talking. If they have kids, kids have to go to the bathroom. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if we go to the bathroom? Of course, come in, use the bathroom. Do you know how much easier it is the next time to invite someone over once they've been in the house the first time? And it could simply be because you all were playing in the front yard with kids and it ended up in a bathroom break, or we need water. Oh, come in while I get some water. So, it's like we really want to move them, and it creates like this tremendous cycle because you're always going to have like various neighbors and you're going to be in different stages depending upon who you're talking to. And there is our neighborhood is a one way in, one way out. And so it's a pretty safe neighborhood to walk in just because there's not that much traffic flow. And it is remarkable how many people notice you when you're out walking. And you don't think that anyone notices you, but they certainly notice you when you're not walking. And I've just kind of had a bit of a crazy season I've been going through in life, and there have just been some things that are known and unknown over the last year that have been going on, and it just hasn't allowed me to walk the way I normally would walk. And some neighbors sent me a text and just said, hey, I haven't seen you in our part of the neighborhood walking, is everything okay? And, and then I would share with them, a portion of some of the things that have happened. Or, someone said, hey, I haven't seen your little dog that looks like a fox. And then I'm like, she died. And so, I know, it's like, and conversation done. But, it's like, but still, it's a conversation you start having, and you see like their compassion on their face, and their, oh, I'm so sorry. And so now all of a sudden you have this thing, this connection that you are building on. I was walking and someone's, don't you hate it when like you see something and it's like too far away and you have to make that mental decision if you're going to run to do it, or, like how do I manage this? And so there was a garbage can that had fallen over, and I saw this lady who was like maybe this big walk out to pick up that garbage can that was bigger than her. And so I was like, I'm gonna have to wind sprint over to her, which is weird, now all of a sudden you have like a total stranger running over to you. And so like I run over, I was like, hey, let me get that for you. Like I look like a total weirdo. And so she is 87 years old. She shared her whole life story with me. And it ended up that she invited me to her house so that I could help her pick out an outfit for a wedding. I was like, you have tapped into my gifting. And her name's Penny, and I'm Jenny. And so I said, well, we're going to write a children's book about the two of us. Like, I was like so excited. But it took time to just slow down and notice like little details and see little things. There was something that happened at work where there were an obscene amount of box lunches that were left over. And so if you leave them, then they just get thrown away, but they were all totally fine. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll take those. And there's a lady that lives down the street, and she has 3 boys, and her husband works very, very hard. And I reached out, sent her a text, and I was like, I have this insane amount of box lunches. Do you want me to drop them off? And she was like, yes, I'll take every one of them. And so then, I showed up, I found out just in that conversation, she was like, you caught me at the right time. We were just headed to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. What's going on? And then it led into that conversation. You think that isn't like a real connection? It's like you have to slow down and think about, how can I talk to these people around me? What am I noticing? What's different? What's off? Is there a place that I could step in here? Or how could I even just bless someone in an abundance that I have? So don't ever underestimate just the power of a tomato plant. Like Irene Vaughn shared that that's how her and David fell in love. Now, obviously, I don't want y'all falling in love if you're married, but it's like, but he left this abundance of, like, he had a tomato harvest, and that little sly dog left a bag of tomatoes for her and won her heart over those, a bag of tomatoes. And so just don't underestimate that. If you look in your garden and you grow tomatoes, you know that sometimes like it can be prolific. Take those to other people. And even if you've moved, don't forget the people that live where you used to live. There may be someone in that old neighborhood that just because you're not there anymore, you may have had a connection with them. And you're like, I bet this would be something I could take back to them. And could you imagine if you showed up at your old neighborhood and you're like, just thought of you, I had this. So don't forget to do that as well. So loving your neighbor seems pretty clear, but sometimes what we do is like, we just forget the second part of the great commandment. We're like, okay, check mark. We love God with all of our heart. Check mark, done. I'm a Christian. Of course I love my neighbor. But we don't always actually do something to show our neighbors that we actually love them. So I want you all to turn to Luke 10, 29 through 37. What we see is like the Good Samaritan. Jesus shares this parable about the Good Samaritan. A lawyer wants to find a loophole. He wants a pass, a not it. He asks, teacher, what must I do to inherit life? And Jesus asked him, what's written in the law of Moses? And maybe the lawyer had listened to Jesus before, because it seems like he sums it up pretty well. Love God and love your neighbor. Jesus says, do this and you will live. So let's start Luke 10, 29 through 37. Now, some of the references may be from an NIV, some may be an ESV. So if you all see that there may be a couple of words that are a little different, that could be the reason, or maybe I just don't know how to read. So, but he desiring to justify himself said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." So who's my neighbor? Tell me, so I can quickly mark it off my list on who it's not. That's what we want. What we want is for there to be this big booming voice from heaven that's like with like a beam of light on this is the person you're supposed to minister to. And then we have like that little nod from the Holy Spirit that's like, take this coffee cake to them. Like we want everything just easily outlined for us, or we just kind of give ourselves a pass because we're wrapped up in everything that we need to do, sometimes just to even survive. So what we have to do is realize that we give ourselves that pass to not pay attention. For some of us, our hey neighbor is going to be a little bit of like an ugh. And I'm sure people in this room have a neighbor that they're not that crazy about, or maybe they've had some type of conflict with. But we're supposed to love our enemies as well. And that is hard. Our neighbors are going to be people we don't expect. They're going to be people we don't respect. And they're going to be in some cases, people we suspect that are suspect. And so, but that doesn't give us an excuse to do nothing. So if the lawyer expands the definition of neighbor to include even his enemies, the command literally seems impossible, which is exactly Jesus's point. That's what he wants us to do, because what we do is we do it through the lens of what we know to be true, what we can do in our own strength, our own abilities, our own abundance or lack of abundance, whatever it is, we put that on top of it on what God might do with it. And so we have to make sure that we're not leaning on what we understand we can do in the situation. So you also have to be really smart as women, one man, but as women, because we can't put ourselves like in some situation because we're not using common sense. I mean, we obviously know we have to go into, and I want to say, I feel like this is all understood, but I just want to be clear, that we have to use common sense. And that might actually mean that you're in a community group with someone, or you have a best friend, and Kelly turns to Vonda and says, "Hey, I want to go and talk to these 5 neighbors, and I want to drop my phone number off. I want to do it by myself. Do you mind just running those with me?" And then it's like, now it's like kind of safety in numbers. Maybe it's a situation where the 2 of you all, your kids are playing, and you're like, "Hey, while you're here, why don't we go do this?" Or you're even strategic that while all the kids are together, they're going to see moms actually going and doing these things together, like while there's like some type of play date this summer. So you can really be intentional in inviting other people into doing this. And maybe someone has a barking dog that's super irritating. And so maybe what you need to do in that situation is like, go get a toy for the dog. Like get some type of chew toy, not like rawhide, but some type of chew toy, take it over to them and be like, I've heard you have a dog now, whatever it is. Kind of break that ice a little bit. And you even could gently and strategically be like, yeah, we go to bed so early, and, I know when you get home because I hear your dog barking. Like, you can kind of like word it like in a gentle way. So, yeah. We have a barking dog. It's a basset hound. It lives diagonally across the street. And he's like, roar, roar. And it will go on for 30 minutes and there's a pattern. And we just like every single night there is a pattern with that. But, I'm not sure what to do for this dog because he barks from inside the house and it's that loud diagonally across the street. So I have some things to pray about. Yeah. So, right. So I want you all to turn to Acts 17. We're going to read 26 through 27. So Acts 17, 26 through 27. I'm going to get started. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each of us. The Samaritan meets the physical, material, financial, and emotional needs of the man in his path. Our neighbors are in our path on a daily basis. Allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. That seems pretty clear to me. Think about how long you've been at your job, how long you've lived at your house, how long you're tied to a school system, whatever it is. Where we live and work is not by accident. So again, verse 26, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. We're exactly where we're supposed to be around the people we're exactly supposed to be around. But are we reaching them at all? So in spite of how crazy this world is getting, God has equipped us to live right now where we are around the people that we live around, and our children are growing up in this situation. So we have a responsibility to not only shield them from the things of the world, but also to teach them beyond what feels great and comfortable. And that's like, I just want you in the safety of my presence, my home, in my car, at an arm's length. We need to show them that it's okay to invite people that don't look like us, sound like us, do not have the same blessings that some of us have, that we're inviting those people into our lives or we're pouring into theirs. So even if sharing the gospel is the ultimate way you can love your neighbor, we don't reduce our neighbors to just a benevolence project or a gospel project. Often as Christians, we can have like those two speeds where it's like most important or not important. And some Christians reduce everything down to church Bible, church Bible. They use all their church words, all their church phrases, atonement, sanctification, just whatever those things are. But in Dr. Ormsby did a great job of discussing this. I think it was like in week 4 of his class, where we no longer live in a world where people understand basic Bible terminology, basic Bible stories. If you made a reference to even a chapter in the Bible, odds are you could be in company that's never even heard of that, let alone all of the words that are more technical to them. So I've felt the pressure from a fellow believer before to rattle off my whole to-do list. Like, they came on super, super strong, and they were pretty relentless about what's next? Are you going to do this? Are you going to live a life on mission? Are you going to do that? And I just was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm trying to answer the questions, but I felt so incredibly uncomfortable, and it felt like it was, well, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? And it felt like, what am I doing? Not what God has done or what he continues to do. And even having that space to let the Holy Spirit lead me. And what I see in my future may not be what God sees in my future. I didn't think this whole last year was going to happen the way it happened, but it did. And, it's changing, every single day that like I'm living right now, just because it's like it was just catastrophic. And so, I didn't predict that. So how on earth could I predict the future on something that's going on? So we've got to be really careful when we're talking to people that we're not just using it as like that Christian lens of just like everyone knows everything that we're talking about. But again, our goal is to share the gospel with people, but that doesn't mean that that's all that we're trying to get to for this person. And we have to be really careful with how we push that with someone and know when that time is right. It's always right to share the gospel, but knowing when perhaps maybe you need to explain something, back off, allow them to ask questions, come back, circle back, whatever it is. So I think we've all been part of those conversations where, you've felt like someone is interested in teaching you something. It could be a man, it could be another woman, it could even be a child where they're like, I need to show you this. And, it's like, that there's those times where they want to show you something. We have to remember, like, our neighbors pick that up, and you don't want to, like, create that weirdness where you're like, I'm just reducing you down to whatever my to-do list is. So when the Bible speaks of loving those who aren't Christians, the main point is certainly evangelistic, but it's not exclusively. Maybe one of the best examples is the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's going to be real hard for someone, like, you don't walk up to that person and go, hey, I know you've been like nearly beat to death, but I'd like to share the gospel with you first. Like, that isn't what you're going to do in that situation. So you have to meet those needs, like be aware of what those immediate needs might actually be, because it might be food, it might be water, it might be that someone had electricity cut off. There are people that are wildly living above their means. So do not think that just because someone's living in what I would call a mansion means that they have the money to actually live there. There are people that live in homes that are literally living paycheck to paycheck and don't have the money that it appears that they have. So even stepping into those lives, and you might understand that there's some needs that need to be met before you can even get to the next thing. So spiritual needs and physical needs are connected. It's a bit like loving your kids. So in Ephesians 4, it tells fathers not to provoke their child, but to bring their children up in discipline and instruction of the Lord. But how effective will your spiritual mentoring go if you never spend any time with your kid? You never play with your kid, you never do anything with your child, and then all of a sudden you're going to be like, and now I'm going to share Jesus with you. They're going to be like, I don't even know you. Like, where's this coming from? Let alone if you're someone that's being kind of cruddy, and then you're going to come back and like share this. It doesn't match up. But how effective is that spiritual mentoring going to be if you just don't spend time with someone? Parenting is about relationship, not just evangelism, and the same thing applies to neighboring, that it's going to be about relationship and evangelism. People need to see you and be with you, and that means it's going to take a little while. It's not just like a one and done type thing. Again, start walking your dog. People notice when you're not around. Like somebody noticed, I was walking, and I know this makes me sound crazy, but sometimes life gets hard. I was walking and I started crying because some of the things that like have happened over the past year, and someone noticed that and reached out. And it's like, thankfully that's not my normal. It's not like every time I'm walking, I'm just like, life's hard. But they had noticed that there was something that was happening. So again, I didn't think anyone noticed that. I didn't know that someone was in their home or their yard and noticed me as and I'm a fast walker. Like as I just quickly walked by, that like I had tears on my face. And I'm like, that's so sweet that they reached out. So just don't underestimate being out in your neighborhood for people to see you and then also noticing them while they're out. Because there might even be, there's a neighbor that lives down the road from me, and I didn't know much about him, but I did notice I didn't see him for a long time, and then I saw him, and he had a wild walk. And I thought, what is going on? And so I would see him over and over again, and I realized he's had a stroke. And this is his PT. Like, he's actually trying to build up a little strength, and his goal was to get from his house to the end of the block and walk back. And it was all he could do to get down there, and then he would have to rest. And a giant hurricane rainstorm came when he was down on our end. And I was like, you have got to come in. Like, you cannot be out in this weather, because he would get down there and he would have to wait. He'd have to take a breath, get up a little bit more strength before he could turn around. So you have to slow down to notice other people. That doesn't mean that just because you see one person that you run out your front door and you're like, can I help you with something? Let's talk about Jesus. We don't want to be that person either. So, when we love others, we're showing off who God is, because we're made in His image. When we love our neighbors, we show that the love of God motivates our love for others. We go beyond just investing in our neighbor, but we start to invest in our neighborhoods, like from the block level. And then if you live out in the country, like down the road, a mile or so, whatever it is, we make a place where people want to be. You have the opportunity to make people feel at home or want them to be in their home. And you have to make that choice of how you're making someone feel. This requires a certain level of self-awareness. I'm just going to be honest, it is an interesting thing that you learn. A lot of you all have been teachers or are currently teachers or whatever, but it is interesting the things you learn when you're standing in front of people and how there's distractions and you have to stay, oh gosh, there's a million things that are going on and you have to keep your thoughts together. I want to say that for some of you all, if you have the joy, joy, joy down in your heart, you need to tell your face. Because there are times where I stand up here and I'm like, everyone hates me and they're going to murder me in the parking lot. And I'm not making it about myself right now, but I'm just saying it can be challenging because there is visual feedback that you give. And if that's the visual feedback you're giving to your neighbor, do you think they're going to approach you? I mean, we're in church worshiping God, and we can't put a smile on our face when we're singing or when we're listening to Dr. Parrish preach. If we can't do it here, I'm pretty certain we're not going to do it. Now, wouldn't it be funny if during church today, everyone is crazy smiling? Chris would be like, what has happened? What has happened to all the women in our church because they're insane? So let's do it. Bring it. Yeah, that would be great. But we need to make sure that we're aware of what we're showing someone. And I know life is busy, and I know life is heartbreaking, and I know that we carry burdens. I carry that heartbreak and those burdens and those responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that supersedes the joy that we have in spite of the brokenness of the world that God has given to us. And our faces, our countenance, our tone, all of those things should reflect what we have, and people should see something different in us. We shouldn't look like we're carrying always the weight of the world. We shouldn't. We should look like we're carrying God in our heart, and we're interested in sharing it. We're interested in other people. When I go to the grocery store, it sort of is a joke with my husband and I. Every person that is 80 and older will stop me, no matter what. And they will just start talking to me. And I think it's because I get eye contact, or I say hello to them, or I notice them. And you realize how starved people are to be noticed, especially elderly people, because odds are they're not going to be on social media the way younger people are. They just probably aren't. They're not going to be as tech savvy as some people. So to have someone just notice you, even if it's by your garbage can that's flipped over, and takes the time to have a conversation with you, she didn't have anyone else to help her pick out an outfit for a wedding. And you're just like, she just wanted somebody to talk to. Did I have 40 minutes to learn her life story? Not really. But, it was completely worth it. And I was like, immediately, I was like, not having that for dinner, not enough time. It's like you just have to pivot and adjust because people are more important than plans. And we forget that. So we have to make sure that we are loving people well. So what are your motives for loving your neighbor? That matters. You can have ulterior motives where, you're really only getting to know your neighbor so you can share the gospel with them. Or you can have the ultimate motive, which is sharing the gospel with them. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing that you're doing. What we ultimately want for our neighbors is for them to come to a saving faith in Christ Jesus. For some of us, it might also be we have an opportunity to encourage fellow believers because you may live next to someone that really could use that encouragement. There are a couple of people. It is funny when you go through something wildly traumatic and heartbreaking and continue to go through that. It is funny the people that you thought would show up often aren't the people that show up. And then the people that show up shock the pants off of you. That you're like, I never expected to get a card from them. I never expected to get that text message from them. I didn't think I was on their radar in that way. And it is such an encouragement when, you encourage another believer that, God just orchestrated like the most beautiful thing because it's been so busy serving on grand jury and just mentally taxing and working and doing all of that and just like other things that are going on and just like trying to get all of these classes, the curriculum done. That's been a really big challenge. And I have gotten a card every day this week from someone. And you're just like, that is, I want to say bizarre. It's like, it's just so weird. Like you open it and you're like, oh gosh, like Lisa. Lisa has this thing where she will, it's like my Lisa Wednesday, that every Wednesday, Lisa will reach out to me and send the sweetest message to me, and it blesses my heart so much. And I look forward to it every Wednesday because we never get to spend as much time together as we want, but I know I'm going to get that from her on Wednesday, and I look forward to it. Don't ever stop. I look forward to it. You can still not only be encouraging your neighbor and sharing the gospel, you could be encouraging and sharing God with your neighbor as well and encouraging them, even if they don't go to the same church. That's okay. They're not our enemy. It's not like we're skins and shirts and we're like on opposing teams. That's not what we're doing. So what I want you all to do this week, we're going to have areas of focus. So our to-do is we're going to pray. So we definitely want to make sure that we are identifying one neighbor that you're going to pray for during the next week. Really concentrate and pray about that one neighbor. And if you don't know, you can even on your list put down white house, gray house, whatever that person is, person across the street. Identify right now before you leave that room who your person is, that neighbor that you're going to pray for. Think about how God might stretch you over the next 6 weeks and pray about that. Think about what He's calling you to do over the next 6 weeks. If there's an area where you don't feel you don't want to do something, you don't see value, or you don't even want to come back next week because you're like, this wasn't for me. Well, this is probably exactly where you need to be then, and you need to pray about that. Then do one small next step that you feel God is calling you to take this coming week. Just one tiny little step beyond your comfort zone. That could be going and sharing your mobile number just for safety reasons. Hey, live next door, just thought I'd share this with you. It could be, being like, gosh, my neighbor, she's a widow, and I'm going to tell my husband. You all have so much power over your husbands to be like, when you edge our yard, will you edge Linda's yard for her? Since Steve passed away, I've noticed that she hasn't done that. And I 100% guarantee Ron would do it. And sometimes men may not notice something that you would notice, but they are 100% willing. And so you need to bring them into your neighboring. So do that one thing, but it's not their responsibility. You still need to do something, but definitely include them in on that process. You might learn a specific neighbor's name. You might invite them over, even for dinner. Go bold. You might even ask them for advice because you know that they always plant tomato plants and you're asking them for some advice. Do I need to fertilize these? What's this neighborhood soil like? Is it fertile? Whatever it is, it's like ask those questions. It's just think of a conversation starter. So your action plan is to come in next week having done something to connect with a neighbor, just one. Do something to connect with just one neighbor. It can be more, but you definitely need to do that. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to read Romans 12, 9 through 21, not in here. You all are going to read it at home and read it every day. I love how eager Roxanne was. Roxanne was like, I'm on it. Yeah, so you all are going to read that at home, and over the next 6 weeks, just read it daily and really ponder what God is revealing to you through His Word and in your heart and some things that you need to work on. And take it a step further. See if you can memorize it. I think as adults, get out of the habit of memorizing. Really try to remember or memorize this passage. So let's close in prayer. God, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to gather and do what you've commanded us to do, to love you with all of our hearts and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Give us a desire to be in relationship with our literal neighbors. Burden us with what burdens you. Help us to slow down so that we can see and hear what our neighbors need. And if that need is you, we boldly share your love and mercy with them. Thank you for generously equipping us to do that and more. May every person in here have a hedge of protection and provision to love their neighbors and step out in faith and love in these coming weeks. Please be with our pastor as he brings his message, brings your message. And thank you for working in our hearts and going before us to work in the hearts of others. We love you so much. And in your name I pray. Amen.